The first shot rang out just as the stagecoach rounded the bend, sending splinters flying from the wooden frame mere inches from Lillian Moore's face. She gasped, clutching her reticule to her chest as the driver shouted and cracked his whip frantically over the team of horses. "Bandits! Hold tight!" the driver called down, his voice nearly lost in the thundering of hooves and the second shot that followed. Arizona Territory, 1878. Lillian had known the journey west would be perilous, but nothing had prepared her for this moment, the moment when the stagecoach lurched violently to one side as a wheel caught in a rut, sending her small valise tumbling to the floor. The elderly couple across from her clung to each other, terror etched on their weathered faces. "Stop the coach!" a gruff voice commanded from outside. "Stop or the next bullet won't miss." The driver cursed but pulled back on the reins, bringing the heaving, snorting horses to a reluctant halt. Dust billowed around them as 5 masked riders emerged from behind the rocks that lined the narrow pass. Lillian's heart hammered against her ribs as the door was wrenched open, revealing a tall, broad-shouldered man with eyes that glittered coldly behind his mask. "Ladies and gentlemen," he drawled, pointing his revolver into the coach, "I believe you have some valuables that would be better suited in our possession." Lillian watched in mute horror as the elderly couple surrendered their money and the woman's wedding band. Then the masked bandit turned to her, extending a gloved hand. "And you, pretty lady? What treasures are you hiding?" With trembling fingers, Lillian handed over her reticule, containing the last of her savings money meant to start her new life as a schoolteacher in Willow Creek. But the man's eyes lingered on the silver locket around her neck, the only keepsake she had of her mother. "That too?" he demanded, gesturing with his gun. "Please," Lillian whispered, her fingers protective around the precious memento. "It has no value to anyone but me." Something shifted in the bandit's gaze, not softening, exactly, but calculating. He leaned closer, his voice dropping low. "You're right. You might be worth more than that trinket." Before Lillian could comprehend his meaning, rough hands seized her arms, pulling her from the coach despite her struggles. She screamed as her feet hit the dusty ground, twisting against the iron grip that held her. "Let the others go," the leader commanded his men. "We've got what we came for." "No!" Lillian cried, fighting with all her strength as she was dragged toward a waiting horse. "Help me!" The elderly woman sobbed as the driver sat frozen, a gun trained on his chest. The other passengers averted their eyes, helpless against the armed bandits. Lillian felt herself being lifted, her skirts tangling around her legs as the leader mounted behind her, one arm wrapped tightly around her waist. "You'll fetch a fine price where we're going," he murmured against her ear, his breath hot and foul. "The men at the border pay well for fair-skinned women." Terror unlike anything Lillian had ever known coursed through her as the bandit kicked his horse into motion, leading his men away from the stagecoach and deeper into the rugged terrain. The afternoon sun beat down mercilessly as they rode, Lillian's throat raw from screaming until she had no voice left. Hours passed. The bandits made camp as dusk fell, the leader binding Lillian's wrists and ankles before pushing her roughly to the ground near the campfire. The men drank whiskey from battered flasks, laughing and casting leering glances in her direction that made her skin crawl. "You should eat," the leader said, shoving a plate of beans toward her with the toe of his boot. "Need to keep your strength up. Damaged goods don't sell well." Lillian turned her face away, refusing to touch the food despite the hunger gnawing at her stomach. She stared instead at the gathering clouds on the horizon, dark and heavy with the promise of rain. A storm was brewing both in the skies and in her heart, where desperation was hardening into resolve. She would not become merchandise to be sold and used. Somehow she would escape. The opportunity came sooner than she could have hoped. As night deepened and the storm clouds rolled closer, bringing with them gusts of wind that bent the scrubby desert vegetation. The bandits' vigilance waned. The whiskey had done its work. 3 of the men were already snoring, while the leader and his lieutenant spoke in low voices by the dying fire. Lillian worked silently at the ropes binding her wrists, rubbing them against a sharp rock she had managed to position behind her back. The fibers began to fray, and hope flickered in her chest like the lightning now flashing in the distance. Then came the first drops of rain, fat and heavy, sizzling as they hit the embers of the fire. The leader cursed, ordering his lieutenant to secure their supplies. In the momentary distraction, Lillian felt the rope give way. Without hesitation, she slipped her hands free, quickly untied her ankles, and took advantage of the deepening darkness to slip away from the camp. Her heart pounding, she ran blindly through the desert scrub, her torn dress catching on cactus spines and thorny bushes. The storm hit with full force, rain sheeting down and soaking her to the skin within moments. Thunder boomed overhead, and lightning split the sky, briefly illuminating the harsh landscape around her. Behind her, a shout rose above the storm. They had discovered her absence. Panic lent speed to her feet as she stumbled through the darkness, the mud sucking at her boots. She could hear hoofbeats now, the bandits mounting a pursuit despite the dangerous conditions. Lillian slipped, falling hard onto the muddy ground. As she struggled to rise, a hand seized her arm, yanking her upright. She screamed, lashing out with her free hand, only to find herself face to face with the leader, his mask now gone, revealing a face contorted with rage. "Thought you could run?" he snarled, shaking her violently. "Nobody escapes Buck Rollins. Nobody!" Lightning flashed again, revealing the dangerous terrain ahead. They stood at the edge of a steep ravine, the rain already turning the ground treacherous beneath their feet. Lillian fought desperately, knowing that her fate, if recaptured, would be worse than anything she could imagine. "Let me go!" she cried, her voice nearly lost in a deafening crack of thunder. "You're coming with me," Rollins growled, dragging her toward where his horse waited, skittish and uneasy in the storm. It was then that another sound cut through the tempest, the steady, powerful drumming of hoofbeats approaching fast. Rollins cursed, releasing Lillian to draw his gun, peering through the curtain of rain. A rider materialized out of the darkness, tall in the saddle atop a massive black stallion that seemed undaunted by the storm. In one fluid motion, the newcomer dismounted, a Winchester rifle raised and aimed. "Let her go, Rollins." The voice was deep, steady, carrying clearly despite the howling wind. Rollins sneered, keeping his gun trained on the stranger. "Bennett Grayson. Should have known you'd be sniffing around. This ain't your business, lawman." "I'm making it my business," the man called Bennett replied, taking a step closer. Water cascaded from the brim of his hat, but his aim never wavered. "The lady's coming with me." Lillian stood frozen between them, rain plastering her hair to her face, her breath coming in short, frightened gasps. Bennett Grayson, she had heard that name whispered with both fear and respect in the towns she'd passed through on her journey west. A former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter, known for bringing in the most dangerous outlaws of the territory. "She's worth a small fortune south of the border," Rollins said, his grip tightening on Lillian's arm. "Walk away, Grayson. Even you can't dodge lightning." As if in answer, a bolt cracked across the sky, illuminating the ravine beside them. In that brief, electric moment, Lillian saw Bennett Grayson clearly, tall and broad-shouldered, his face weathered by sun and wind, dark eyes intense beneath the brim of his hat. Something in those eyes gave her courage. "I'd rather take my chances with the lightning than with you," she said, suddenly twisting free of Rollins' grip and driving her elbow hard into his ribs. The outlaw staggered, momentarily winded, and in that instant, Bennett fired. Rollins howled as the bullet grazed his shooting arm, his gun dropping from nerveless fingers into the mud. With a roar of rage, he lunged for Lillian, catching her around the waist and dragging her dangerously close to the edge of the ravine. "Come any closer and we both go over," he shouted at Bennett, who had advanced several steps. Bennett stopped, lowering his rifle slightly. "Think, Rollins. You're injured. Your men are scattered. There's nowhere to go." "There's always somewhere to go," Rollins replied, edging backward, using Lillian as a shield. "And I ain't going to prison." The ground beneath them was sodden, unstable. Lillian felt it shift, a terrible sliding sensation that made her stomach lurch. Rollins felt it too, his eyes widening in sudden fear as the edge of the ravine began to crumble. In that moment of distraction, Bennett lunged forward, tackling both of them away from the edge as a section of the ravine collapsed with a wet, tearing sound. They tumbled into the mud, Rollins losing his grip on Lillian as Bennett's fist connected with his jaw. The two men grappled in the rain-soaked earth, trading blows as Lillian scrambled to safety. Bennett was stronger, more skilled, but Rollins fought with the desperate fury of a cornered animal. He managed to land a lucky strike that sent Bennett reeling, then scrabbled for the fallen gun half buried in the mud. Lillian didn't hesitate. She seized a rock from the ground and brought it down hard on Rollins' outstretched hand. He howled, clutching his crushed fingers, giving Bennett the opening he needed to deliver a final, decisive blow that left the outlaw unconscious. Breathing hard, Bennett rose to his feet, quickly binding Rollins with a length of rope from his saddle. Only then did he turn to Lillian, concern evident in his dark eyes as he took in her bedraggled state. "Are you hurt, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler than before. Lillian shook her head, suddenly aware of how she must look, dress torn and muddied, hair a tangled mess, face streaked with rain and tears. Yet something in the way Bennett looked at her made her feel strangely protected rather than exposed. "I'm Lillian Moore," she said, having to raise her voice as another roll of thunder shook the ground. "I was on the stagecoach to Willow Creek when they attacked." Bennett nodded, securing Rollins to his own horse before turning back to her. "That stagecoach made it to town minus one passenger." The driver raised the alarm. He paused, studying her with a mixture of admiration and concern. "You're a brave woman, Miss Moore. Not many would have tried to escape like you did." Before Lillian could respond, the rain intensified, coming down in blinding sheets. Bennett glanced at the sky, his expression grim. "We need shelter. There's a line shack about a mile from here. Can you ride?" At her nod, he helped her onto his stallion, then mounted behind her, one arm securely around her waist as he took the reins with his free hand. With Rollins' horse tethered behind them, they set off through the storm, the outlaw bouncing unconscious over his saddle. Lillian was acutely aware of Bennett's solid presence at her back, the strength in the arm that held her steady, the warmth of his body against the chill of her rain-soaked clothes. Despite everything, she felt safe for the first time since the stagecoach had been attacked. The line shack was little more than a crude cabin, built to shelter cowboys working the distant edges of ranch property. Bennett secured Rollins to a support post inside, checking that the outlaw was still breathing before turning his attention to getting a fire started in the small stone hearth. "Your clothes are soaked through," he said, not looking at Lillian as he coaxed flames from the dry kindling stored beside the hearth. "There might be some spare clothes in the trunk over there. They won't fit well, but they'll be dry." Lillian found a rough cotton shirt and trousers that had clearly belonged to a ranch hand. Bennett respectfully turned his back while she changed behind a threadbare blanket strung across one corner of the shack. The clothes were indeed too large, but the relief of being in dry garments was immense. "Thank you," she said when she emerged, self-consciously rolling up the sleeves of the oversized shirt. For everything. If you hadn't come when you did. Bennett had removed his duster and hat, revealing broad shoulders and dark hair streaked with silver at the temples. He looked up from tending the fire, his expression somber. No need for thanks. I've been tracking Rollins and his gang for weeks. They've done this before, taking women to sell across the border. A shudder ran through Lillian at how close she had come to such a fate. How did you find me in the storm? Luck, he admitted, straightening up. I was following their trail when the storm hit. Lost it in the rain, but then I heard shouting. He glanced at Rollins, still unconscious and securely bound. He's wanted in 3 territories. There's a substantial reward. Lillian wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly feeling the full weight of exhaustion. I've lost everything. My position in Willow Creek, my savings, even my clothes. The school board will still want their teacher, Bennett said, gesturing for her to sit near the fire. And Rollins' gang didn't get far with the stagecoach loot. It'll be recovered. Hope flickered in Lillian's chest as she sank down gratefully by the warmth of the flames. You think so? Bennett nodded, passing her a battered tin cup filled with coffee from the pot he'd put on the fire. I know so. Martha Everett, she's head of the school board. She's been fretting for months about finding a qualified teacher. When she hears what you've been through, she'll likely offer you room and board until you're settled. His certainty was comforting, as was the hot coffee that warmed Lillian from the inside out. Outside, the storm continued to rage, but within the crude shelter, a different kind of warmth was building, one born of shared danger and unexpected rescue. What about you? Lillian asked, studying Bennett over the rim of her cup. After you deliver him to the authorities? Something flickered in Bennett's eyes, a momentary hesitation, perhaps even loneliness. On to the next bounty, I suppose. That's the job. Sounds lonely, Lillian observed quietly. Bennett looked away, adding another log to the fire. It can be, but it suits me. Or it did. The way he said those last 3 words made Lillian wonder what story lay behind them. Before she could ask, Rollins groaned, regaining consciousness. Bennett moved immediately to check the outlaw's bonds, his manner efficient and impersonal. You're done, Rollins, he said flatly. The territorial marshal has a cell waiting with your name on it. Rollins spat, his eyes burning with hatred as they fixed on Lillian. You'll regret crossing me, woman. My boys are still out there. Your boys scattered like quail when the storm hit, Bennett replied coolly. And they'll keep running when they hear you've been caught. That's how it always goes with your kind. He turned his back on the outlaw, dismissing him, and returned to sit beside Lillian. Try to get some rest, he suggested. I'll keep watch. Tomorrow I'll take you to Willow Creek, then deliver him to the marshal at Fort Benton. Lillian nodded, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the day. She lay down on a rough blanket near the fire, expecting sleep to be impossible with an outlaw in the room and a storm howling outside. Yet with Bennett's steady presence keeping guard, her eyes grew heavy, and she drifted into an exhausted slumber. She woke sometime in the night to find the storm had subsided to a gentle patter of rain on the roof. Bennett sat with his back against the wall, rifle across his knees, alert despite the late hour. Rollins appeared to be sleeping, his chin resting on his chest. You should sleep too, Lillian said softly, sitting up. Bennett glanced at her, surprise evident on his face. I'm fine, used to long nights. At least rest a while, she insisted. I can keep watch. I've had some sleep already. After a moment's hesitation, Bennett nodded, handing her the rifle. Wake me in 2 hours. Lillian took the weapon, settling herself against the wall where she could see both the door and Rollins. Bennett stretched out nearby, his hat pulled low over his eyes. Within minutes, his breathing deepened into sleep. In the quiet of the night, with only the sound of rain and the occasional pop from the fire, Lillian studied the man who had saved her. In repose, the hard lines of his face softened, revealing a younger man than she had first thought, perhaps 35 to her 22. There was a small scar at the corner of his mouth that quirked upward slightly, giving him the appearance of smiling even in sleep. When dawn came, streaking pale light through the single grimy window, Bennett was already awake, rebuilding the fire and heating more coffee. Rollins glared sullenly from his position by the post, refusing the water Bennett offered him. "The rain's stopped," Bennett observed, handing Lillian a tin plate with hardtack softened in coffee-meager provisions from his saddlebags. "Roads will be muddy, but passable. We should reach Willow Creek by midday." As they prepared to leave, Lillian changed back into her own clothes, now mostly dry though sadly wrinkled and torn. She emerged from behind the blanket to find Bennett securing Rollins for travel, the outlaw's hands bound behind his back, a lead rope attached to guide him alongside the horses. The world outside was transformed by the night's rain, the desert washed clean, colors more vivid against the damp earth. Bennett helped Lillian onto his stallion, then mounted behind her as before. This time, however, there was a different quality to their closeness, a comfort rather than mere necessity. They rode in companionable silence for a time, the only sounds the steady rhythm of hoofbeats and Rollins' occasional grumbled curses when he stumbled on the muddy trail. Eventually, Bennett spoke, his voice quiet near Lillian's ear. "What brought you all the way to Arizona Territory alone, Miss Moore?" Lillian considered her answer carefully. "A chance to make my own way. After my parents died, there wasn't much left for me in Philadelphia. Teaching positions for women are scarce in the East, but out here." She shrugged slightly. "Out here they care more about whether you can teach children to read than about your family connections or fortune." Bennett nodded, understanding in his silence. After another mile, he offered his own story without prompting. "I was a ranger for 8 years. Thought I'd do that work forever. Then there was a raid on a settlement near the border. By the time we arrived, it was too late for most. There was a little girl." He paused, his voice tightening. "She looked up at me with her daddy's blood on her face and asked why we hadn't come sooner." Lillian's heart ached at the pain evident in his words. "That wasn't your fault." "Maybe not, but I couldn't wear the badge after that. Turned to bounty hunting instead. At least then I'm answerable only to myself." Lillian understood then the solitude, the relentless pursuit of men like Rollins. Bennett was still trying to arrive in time, still trying to save that little girl in every woman he rescued from outlaws. "And is it enough?" she asked softly. "This life you've chosen?" Bennett was silent for so long that Lillian thought he might not answer. When he did, his voice held a note she hadn't heard before: uncertainty, perhaps even longing. It was, until yesterday. The significance of those words hung between them as they crested a rise, bringing Willow Creek into view in the valley below. It was smaller than Lillian had expected, a church spire, a main street lined with wooden buildings, scattered houses and corrals spreading outward. Yet seeing it stirred something in her chest, possibility, perhaps. A new beginning. As they rode into town, they drew curious stares from locals going about their morning business. Whispers followed in their wake, eyes widening at the sight of Rollins trudging sullenly behind Bennett's horse. By the time they reached the sheriff's office, a small crowd had gathered. Sheriff Thomas Halloran emerged, thumbs hooked in his belt, eyebrows rising at the sight of them. "Bennett Grayson," he said, a smile breaking across his weathered face. "Heard you might be in the territory, and I see you've brought company." "Buck Rollins," Bennett said, dismounting and helping Lillian down before securing Rollins to the hitching post. Caught him and his gang robbing the Willow Creek stage yesterday. The rest scattered in the storm. Halloran's eyes narrowed as he studied the outlaw, then shifted to Lillian, taking in her disheveled appearance with concern. "And the lady?" "Lillian Moore," Bennett said. "Your new schoolteacher. Rollins took her from the stage. She fought back, helped me capture him, in fact." A murmur ran through the gathering crowd. An older woman pushed forward, her gray hair neatly pinned beneath a modest bonnet, sharp eyes assessing Lillian from behind wire-rimmed spectacles. "Martha Everett," she introduced herself, extending a hand to Lillian. "Head of the school board. We feared something terrible had happened when the stage arrived without you, Miss Moore." Lillian accepted the handshake, suddenly conscious of her bedraggled state. "I apologize for my appearance, Mrs. Everett. It's been a difficult journey." Martha waved away the apology. "Nonsense, child. What matters is that you're safe. And arriving with Bennett Grayson speaks well of you." She cast an approving glance at Bennett, who was conferring quietly with Sheriff Halloran. "He's not a man who suffers fools gladly." "He saved my life," Lillian said simply. Martha's expression softened. "Then we owe him a debt. Come, you'll stay with me until we can arrange proper accommodations. The schoolhouse has living quarters, but they need some attention before they're habitable." As Martha led her away, Lillian glanced back to find Bennett watching her, something unreadable in his dark eyes. He nodded once, a gesture that somehow contained both farewell and promise, before turning back to the sheriff and his prisoner. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. Martha proved to be a formidable ally, introducing Lillian to the townspeople, helping her replace her lost belongings, and showing her the schoolhouse where she would teach. Word of her ordeal and escape spread quickly, earning her respect from the hardy frontier community. Of Bennett there was no sign. Sheriff Halloran informed her that he had departed the morning after their arrival, taking Rollins to Fort Benton to collect the bounty on his head. Lillian told herself that the hollow feeling in her chest was merely disappointment at not having properly thanked him. A week after her arrival, Lillian stood in the newly cleaned schoolhouse, arranging books on shelves and preparing for classes to begin. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, dust motes dancing in the golden light, when a shadow fell across the doorway. She turned, her heart skipping a beat as Bennett Grayson filled the frame, hat in hand, looking somewhat uncomfortable in a clean shirt and brushed coat. "Mr. Grayson," she said, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. "I didn't expect to see you again." "Bennett, please," he replied, stepping inside, his eyes taking in the transformed schoolroom. "This looks like a proper place of learning now." Lillian smiled, setting down the primer she'd been holding. "The children arrive on Monday, 26 of them, from what Mrs. Everett tells me." Bennett nodded, turning his hat in his hands, a gesture that spoke of nervousness unusual in such a self-possessed man. "I delivered Rollins. He'll hang for his crimes." "Good," Lillian said firmly, surprising herself with the vehemence of her response. Then, more softly, "What brings you back to Willow Creek? Another bounty?" Bennett met her eyes directly. "No, something else entirely." He took a deep breath, as if steeling himself. "I've been thinking about what you asked me, about whether this life is enough." Lillian's pulse quickened as she moved closer to him. "And what conclusion did you reach?" "That it isn't. Not anymore." He set his hat down on a student desk, his movements deliberate. "I've spent years chasing down the worst men the frontier has to offer, sleeping under stars, eating dust, living for the next bounty. And until a week ago, I thought that was all I needed." "What changed?" Lillian asked, though she hoped she knew the answer. Bennett's gaze was steady, open in a way it hadn't been during their journey to Willow Creek. I met a woman who wasn't afraid to ask hard questions, who fought back against men twice her size, who looked at me and saw more than just a gun for hire. He closed the distance between them, reaching tentatively to take her hand. His touch was gentle, at odds with the strength she knew those hands possessed. I've bought land, just outside town. Good water, decent grazing. Sheriff Halloran mentioned they need a deputy, someone who knows the territory, can handle trouble when it comes. Hope bloomed in Lillian's chest, bright and warm. Are you saying you're staying in Willow Creek? I'm saying I'd like to, if there's reason enough. His eyes searched hers, vulnerability evident beneath his usual confidence. If the schoolteacher might consider taking walks with me on Sunday afternoons, perhaps even allowing me to court her properly. Lillian found herself smiling, her free hand reaching up to touch the small scar at the corner of his mouth. The schoolteacher would like that very much. Bennett's answering smile transformed his face, erasing years of solitude and hard living. With infinite care, he leaned down, his lips meeting hers in a kiss as gentle as it was profound, a promise of protection, of companionship, of a future neither had expected to find. When they parted, Lillian kept her hand in his, marveling at how perfectly they fit together. She, who had journeyed west seeking independence, and he, who had roamed the frontier avoiding connection, both finding, in the aftermath of danger, something neither had been looking for but both desperately needed. I never believed in fate, Bennett said quietly, his forehead resting against hers. But riding through that storm to find you, that wasn't just luck. No, Lillian agreed, her heart full. It was the beginning. And as the afternoon sun bathed the schoolhouse in golden light, they began to plan a future together, a future built on courage and second chances, on a love born in the wildness of the frontier but destined to flourish in the community they would both call home. 2 years later, on a clear spring morning, Lillian stood on the porch of their ranch house, watching Bennett teach their infant daughter to wave at the passing clouds. Their home stood on the land he had purchased upon returning to Willow Creek, now transformed into a thriving small ranch where he raised horses when not serving as the town's deputy. Lillian still taught at the schoolhouse, her students now numbering 34 as Willow Creek grew steadily. In the evenings, she would return home to find Bennett waiting, ready to share the day's events and help with whatever needed doing, whether it was cooking supper or rocking little Emma to sleep. As she watched her husband and daughter, Lillian's hand drifted to the silver locket she still wore, the one possession Rollins hadn't managed to take from her. Inside was a small portrait of her parents, and now, beside it, a tiny lock of Emma's downy hair. Bennett looked up, catching her eye, and smiled, that same smile that had first appeared when she agreed to let him court her. It still made her heart skip a beat, still reminded her of how close she had come to a very different fate, and how one man's determination had changed everything. The storm that had brought them together was long past, but its legacy remained in their love, in their family, in the life they had built from the wreckage of that terrifying day. And when spring storms rolled across the Arizona territory, thunder echoing off the distant mountains, Lillian would stand with Bennett on their porch, his arm around her waist, holding her close as they watched nature's display together, no longer afraid, but grateful for the tempest that had led them home.